Right, well, finally, we're starting up. Hi, Gary.
Hi, Lynette.
I start by introducing myself. I'm still so new to this that I'm going to fumble, but it doesn't really matter. Right, my name's Lynette Malone, and I am the founder of the Astrology Collective, and I'm about to introduce you to a friend of mine who will be giving our very first classes on esoteric astrology. So, without further ado, the deeply thoughtful and very sincere Gary Kidgell. Gary, welcome to the collective.
Thank you, Lynette. I'm delighted to be here.
Right, I've said hi twice now, so I'll move on. Gary will bring us his extensive experience over almost 40 years as a consultant, author, speaker and teacher of astrological, mythological and spiritual wisdom. Not only is he much loved for his insightful and clarifying chart readings, but Gary has also lectured extensively throughout the UK and Europe. Under the tutelage of Dr. Douglas Baker, Gary obtained the Claregate College Bachelor of Metaphysics degree in 1994. He was then invited to become a tutor for the course. Between 2010 and 2014, as the Director of Studies for the Claregate Metaphysics Group, Gary compiled 2 online audiovisual courses based on the wisdom teachings: Foundations in Esoteric Studies and Esoteric Psychology, the 7 Rays. He possesses a particular interest in the symbolism of myths and dreams. Gary's also written 2 books, The Inner Journey, Pathways to the Higher Self, and Greek Hero Myths, Symbols of Transformation. And I've read both of these books, and also, hopefully we're going to be selling them on our website later. I'll just read you a little bit about the inner journey, because if you're new to the esoteric path, or you just like things explained simply, I utterly and completely recommend this book. And if you're thinking of doing Gary's astrological course, this will also just kind of deepen and give you background, but you don't have to be even into astrology to read this. It stands on its own as a wonderful reference book. And on the back it says, oh, I'll just try and hold it straight there. Gary Kidgell outlines the nature of the universe and the role of humanity. And the role of humanity therein in the light of the timeless spiritual truths found within the ancient wisdom. He also considers the related contemporary teachings and practices of the transpersonal psychologist, Roberto Asogioli, the pioneering depth psychologist, Carl Jung, and the 20th century student of myth, Joseph Campbell. There is a particular emphasis upon the Jungian concept of archetypes and their representations in the human psyche through myth and symbol. Now, I'll just read you a review as well, because it's worth it. So sit back and listen. This review is from Amazon. I didn't know what to expect and thought it might be too academic. Now, as a side note, I might say that's completely understandable, because a lot of theosophical writing is very academically written and quite difficult to understand. However, Gary has an incredible gift for explaining very complex matters. I really enjoyed reading this book, and it didn't matter that I wasn't familiar with the theosophical references. I particularly enjoyed reading about archetypes and the way in which we are influenced and affected by them as individuals and as a whole. I'm encouraged to find more about some of the concepts he raised, which is a great outcome from reading a book. Okay, this book was an indispensable resource for my path. I've read many books on depth psychology, but had never considered archetypal energies. This book filled a very important gap in my knowledge and took my understanding to a higher plane. And that to me also, Gary, is the intriguing thing about the type of work that you do, that you combine the esoteric with all of the wisdom and of archetypes with Jungian, with Jung and Jungian understanding, and a modern way of understanding and explaining that. Okay, so Gary, I thought we might begin. We're just going to ask you about you now, because the main purpose of this is for you to get to know our speakers and teachers. Gary, I thought we might begin with your backstory, so to speak. You're deeply committed to the esoteric path. So I'd love to hear a bit about what attracted you or led you to the spiritual path.
Thanks, Lynette. In many ways, I was compelled towards the path. Like so many people, I experienced what the wisdom teachings refer to as divine unrest, where the transient affairs of everyday life were not enough to satisfy me or sustain me. When I was in my late teens, I had no knowledge of astrology at that time, but my progressed Uranus, my esoteric ascendant ruler, turned retrograde, whilst the same planet entered my first house. The effects were very Uranian. I saw myself very much as an individual with a unique role to play within the grand scheme of things. But within my psyche, there was a lot of chaos. I had no one I could refer to in terms of thoughts that I had developed about what life meant and why we were here. And it got to the stage where I wondered if I'd just gone off the rails in life completely. And also going to work each day, I did actually quite comically wonder if everyone else had already gotten this secret. They worked it out, what life was about, and then they were just fitting into everyday roles. So it was all a bit challenging, a bit chaotic. I actually sought refuge in punk rock, which kind of gave me a sense of belonging, and it was somewhere where I could channel these energies. In terms of the esoteric, I woke to this in 1983 when on holiday in London. I was with a girlfriend, my girlfriend, and we were in the shop Selfridges. We came across a bookshelf with tarot cards on it, and I was looking at these, and suddenly there was a soft voice from behind me. Are you interested in these cards? And I turned around. There was this very well-dressed, quite large American gentleman, and he said to me, the cards are very useful in terms of spiritual development. You'll find the symbology of great value. And he then said, spiritual development, it's a really good thing for someone to get into. And that really planted a seed for me. And I discovered bookshops in London, that time, you know, selling esoteric books. And I suddenly realized what my life was about and why I was here. That
Sounds
was what
very
to the path.
Well, I certainly relate to your story. I mean, it sounds very revelationary, that moment of the cards. And it's interesting how many people actually come into a spiritual path through the tarot, because it's symbols and archetypes, and it speaks to, it's not so easy to just intellectualize it. You know, it kind of takes you to another place in a way to, yeah. Okay, so after that, you studied with Douglas Baker. How did you come to get involved with Douglas Baker? And yeah, could you tell us a little about him? Who is he?
Of
and
course.
Why were you drawn to his teachings? I suppose, you know, and was it astrology that you first, that first drew you to Baker, or the other way around?
No, I had taught myself orthodox astrology, reading the likes of Liz Green, Howard Susportus, Dane Rudhyar, Stephen Arroyo. And I was meditating a lot in the late 80s, and astrology was my favorite subject. I thought it was the best key to the human psyche. And I came across Alice Bailey's Esoteric Astrology book in a bookshop, and I just felt there's something about this that feels right for me. I began to buy up other Bailey books, and a friend of mine had a lot of Baker books, which he'd acquired secondhand, and I began borrowing them. And I thought, these are very clear, very explicit, they're very empowering. And that was what drew me to Baker. Then I contacted his ashram, and well, for the purpose of a ray analysis. I was fascinated by the 7 ray teachings, and I then traveled down to London and met members of his group and had my rays analyzed in front of them as a part of the teaching process. That was how I became involved with Baker. This led to me doing the old Claregate course, then teaching it, as you mentioned. Baker was an English esotericist steeped in the teachings of ancient wisdom. As you probably know, he wrote a large number of books. He also gave thousands of lectures on a worldwide basis. He established a metaphysical college called Claregate in Hertfordshire, England. And it was here that a group of aspirants from various countries constellated around him and his work. And as you know, he also formulated the unique and revolutionary form of astrology, this being the one that I now practice.
So was he like a bridge between the very abstract esotericism of Alice Bailey, which is kind of possibly only appeals to us very hardened people on the path, and everyday people looking for a better understanding of what is spirituality, what is the soul, you know, the soul and the personality, and wanting to use astrology for transformational purposes. You know, a bit like how we started off, like, you need a lot of transformation to happen, and at first you tend to think it's just in order to, you know, get on in the world. When you're very young, you sort of come to a realization you're not quite a whole person yet, and that just desperately running around to different groups isn't going to do it. And then as you become more integrated, you start to realize that you're more than what your personality gives you in a way. So there's that journey to recognizing yourself as soul, and the point where where people actually might want to step into Alice Bailey. I know you'll correct me if I've got this completely wrong, because I don't really understand Baker well enough. You know, I get the feeling that he's a sort of bridge because of the fact that he uses he talks so much about archetypes and, you know, Jungian kind of ideas and terminology and things. Would that be a correct way of looking at it, or is it not quite right?
Well, I'll give you my answer, or my opinion of Douglas Baker in terms of his work. Baker was emphatic that esoteric teachings should be put across in the language of the day. They should be accessible. And in my opinion, Baker possessed a profound ability in terms of doing this. As well as Alice Bailey, we'd really have to consider the other theosophy and the various offshoots. You know, Baker's work was relative to all of these, but his astrology and a lot of the work he did in terms of exploration of the inner world is classic Jungian work, really, and interpretation of symbolism, you know, as representations of archetypal forces, which I'm sure this will come up a bit later in the interview. So Baker, in some ways, perhaps bridge isn't the right word, perhaps more giving someone a key towards unlocking the wisdom teachings, including Bailey, which, as you say, they're very abstruse, they're very unwieldy to most people, and it's very easy for someone to pick up one of those books, realize there's something great about it, there's inner treasure, but to find it almost impenetrable in terms of the terminology and the style of language. And in my opinion, Baker was an expert at making the contents accessible, but he was also a great pioneer in terms of his astrology. I think he fulfilled both roles as a teacher who could simplify the abstract, but also a pioneer, someone who is seeking to take humanity beyond its current frontier in terms of consciousness.
So although he had an obvious mission in life, which he fulfilled, to put these ideas and teachings into language that was understandable and concepts that people could grasp, he was also working at kind of taking it beyond, taking people beyond where they were already at.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. And well, I guess that's why I met you, because that was my vision, or is my vision, with the Astrology Collective, that we can bring in sort of more Jungian archetypal astrologers and ancient wisdom teachings and show people how that connects. So that's been a kind of a wish, I guess, of mine for a long time. And then, what do you know? I met you. So how lucky are we? Yeah. All right. Gonna look at my questions now. What have I forgotten to ask you? Okay. I've possibly covered some of these. You're an esoteric astrologer and you give consultations and teach as well. So give us a definition of esoteric astrology and how it differs from mainstream astrology. This would be good, actually, for people who are interested in your class.
Certainly. Well, throughout the ages, humanity has developed various techniques towards effecting spiritual transformation. These are often referred to as keys to the mysteries. These have included alchemy, the Kabbalah, and the psychology of the seven rays. And these keys to the mysteries should possess an ability to synthesize the content of the esoteric teachings and spiritual teachings and make them applicable to contemporary life and issues that relate to one's spiritual growth. So these keys, in essence, enable the spiritual aspirant to gain higher levels of consciousness by connecting them to the soul or higher self and the expression of it. Now, Baker's form of astrology, esoteric astrology, is a key to the mysteries applicable to 21st century life. He uses the planetary rulers given by Alice Bailey, the founder of the Arcane School, and Baker's astrology builds upon and enhances the pioneering work of Carl Jung, and as we talked about, his concept of archetypes, how these are represented within the human psyche as symbols. Of course, we all possess a unique soul's purpose. It's been with us since birth. It's the very reason why we're here. And esoteric astrology, in accord with the wisdom teachings, considers one as a soul that has adopted a personality comprised of the mind, emotions, and physical body, so that it may further its evolution. And esoteric astrology is about assessing the soul's purpose, highlighting ways in which this may be best expressed, whilst also outlining other factors within the chart that can either help or hinder this process. And on this basis, one is given spiritual meaning and direction in life. As you probably know, esoteric astrology employs, at least in the main, different planetary rulers to traditional astrology. And these are relevant to anyone who is seeking to effect spiritual development. Esoteric astrology considers the Earth within the natal chart, as well as the esoteric planet Vulcan. And through a revolutionary technique initiated by Douglas Baker called the Cleargate Method, esoteric astrology employs a language of the unconscious. It relates the archetypal energy contained in astrological symbols to images that we receive in dreams and meditation and in synchronicities. So as well as offering insight into the purpose of the soul and our existential nature, the natal chart can also relate us to the meaning of our existential symbols. And this can facilitate a dialogue between the soul, the higher self, and the personality, where the personality is given appropriate guidance. This is achieved by employing everyday symbols that we perceive in our external world, what psychologists would call our ex externa, relating these to the glyphs or symbols of the horoscope. And this provides a way in which we may access the archetypal realms of the soul that Roberto Assagioli, who was a student of Bailey, he called this the superconscious.
Okay, so through language, did you just hear that sound? There's a very strange sound come on. Oh, it doesn't matter, it's gone now. Anyway.
No.
Right. I've got gremlins in my computer. Strange things happen sometimes. So through so you're really looking at the language of astrology, but also language using astrology. It's not just the language of astrology, it's language, it's using astrology to understand language. So you're kind of gathering together groups of key words that are to do with images, to do with certain zodiac signs and planets, and those are then being used in some way as a key into your own subconscious, your unconscious, your dreams.
Yeah, we're talking about symbolic language. As Jung stated, archetypes are represented within the human psyche as symbols. I will probably discuss archetypes later in more depth, hopefully, or give me the opportunity. But just Jung stated archetypes are represented within the psyche as
that was
symbols.
going to be my next question. Sorry, it was going to be my next question. So rip away.
Okay, well, yeah. So basically, what that is saying is that the soul or higher self communicates to us through symbolism, and esoteric astrology, devised, at least the form devised by Douglas Baker, presents a key in terms of interpreting symbolic language within the context of one's astrological chart. I'd like to describe it as an effective Rosetta Stone of the unconscious. As I'm sure you know, when the Frenchmen discovered the Rosetta Stone, it provided a key to interpreting Egyptian hieroglyphics. And Baker's form of astrology is, in essence, an exercise in abstract thought that provides a key towards interpreting the language of the unconscious, which is symbolic.
Right. Well, it sounds very interesting, and I'm looking forward to doing it because I did start this course with you a while back, but other things got in the way. So, yeah. All right. Which astrologers, that was my next question. which astrologers or Jungian thinkers, apart from Baker, had the greatest influence on you, or do you admire the most?
Good question. I mentioned Liz Green and Howard Susportus earlier. Liz Green was effectively my introduction to Jungian psychology. I liked her style of writing. I felt Howard Susportus, a bit like Baker in some ways, I felt he had a profound gift for simplifying abstruse matters and bringing them down to earth. I was a big fan of Alexander Ruperti's excellent book, Cycles of Becoming.
Oh, brilliant.
Of course, I still am. And that's what led me to the work of Dane Rudger, who I consider as a spiritual pioneer and visionary.
Yeah.
And Rudger, in many ways, was the bridge for me between traditional and esoteric astrology. In terms of Jungians, I particularly like Edward Edinger. His book Ego and Archetypes, and his one on Greek myths, unsurprisingly. I like James Hillman as well. I'm a fan of Marie-Louise von Franz. All the usual Jungians, really.
I think if we compared bookcases, they'd be very similar. I mean, I adore Liz Green because she's really hard hitting, you know. I mean, I was doing my master's in psychology, and I think that was a really big turnaround for me when I kind of went, this is not as good as astrology. And you read people like Liz Green, I mean, the absolute depth of understanding. And yes, and Essinger's very good for Essinger. He's a very good interpreter of some of Jung's more obscure books. It's actually quite handy to read him first because he kind of, he gives a synopsis in a way. Well, not a synopsis, he's very deep. And
Ego and
yeah,
Archetype book, which is
yeah.
here.
Oh,
That
Hillman,
was
I
actually
adore.
recommended on the Baker course as a recommended
Oh, okay.
reading, as was Jung's Man
I
and the
must read
Symbols.
that. Yeah, I don't know if I read that years ago, but I don't actually have that book. My bookshelf feels empty now. I think I might have to get it. It looks fabulous. And I'm starting a reading group soon, and I'm hoping I can find enough people that we look at, like we read Marie Bonfant's with all her fairy tales, archetypes and fairy tales and things like that, and then relate them to the planets. Because it's really a great, that kind of cross-referencing is a way to really deepen it. Otherwise, a lot of people get caught up in a kind of cookbook attitude, toward, a two-dimensional way of looking at astrology. Yeah. So, yay. Right. Okay. What's my next question? Oh, what inspired you to write your books?
I tended to write for a number of years. It was only when I got out of the mundane work environment that I really felt I possessed the necessary resources in terms of time and focus so that I could write these books. My soul is on the second ray of love wisdom, for anyone familiar with the ray teachings, and I consider myself essentially as a teacher. And that is what inspired me to write books. I basically wanted to share my insights, derived from the work of others, of course, and put something together to assist people towards their own spiritual growth, hopefully to educate and inspire. That's how I would describe it. Just playing my own part within the grand scheme of things. If you think of American football and the guy's trying to get the first down, then someone goes for the second and so on. It's just trying to assist in advancing the human condition in my tiny way, of course. Infinitesimal is the best word probably to describe that, yeah.
Educate and inspire. Well, much gratitude for that. I think that you do that. Most definitely. And you also give a lot of free talks for the Theosophy. I mentioned free because having given talks myself, I know what a huge amount of time to give it takes to actually write a talk. And the fact that when you talk about something, it's from the heart. So there's a huge expenditure of energy there. But yeah, Gary's got some great talks if you want to check them out on Theosophy. What was it called, that site? If you want to understand a bit about Theosophy and I think some talks on astrology.
There's a good channel by someone who's subsequently become a friend of mine, Anne Kelly, on YouTube called Living Theosophy. She does a lot of interviews with various theosophists and people with an interest in the esoteric. So
Living Theosophy. And there's also recordings of some lectures that you've given at various Theosophy societies.
Yeah, there's quite a few. There are,
That's right. So if you want to check Gary out further, and if you want to check the path out further, if you want to check esoteric astrology out a little bit more, if you're thinking about doing his course, then I recommend it. I mean, that's what I did when I first became interested in esoteric things. And, it's so easy these days. There's YouTube, but sometimes you have to know, I mean, there can be so many people on YouTube. And if you don't already know a name, it can kind of be difficult to actually find someone. Yeah. Okay. Oh, that's it. First of all, I just want to mention that Gary's giving us a talk in April, which I forgot to write the name of down. Do you recall what it is? We're going to talk about it. It's been a little while since we've talked about it.
I suggested a couple of titles. I think it started off as Esoteric Astrology and the Spiritual Ascent. And then I decided to call it Esoteric Astrology, a Key to the Mysteries for the 21st Century. So you can choose between those two.
That's big. I think it's already up on our web, but we can change it. It's not too late. I'll talk about that with you after. All right. And so that's going to be on the 24th of April on a Sunday, 4 p.m. Perth, West Australian time, which is a very obscure time. If you're anywhere else in the entire world, apart from Vietnam or Bali, about the only people that have the same timeline as us. So Gary is very nicely going to be up early in the mornings giving us talks. So 4 o'clock, 24th of April will be about 6 o'clock for the rest of Australia, and 7 o'clock for New Zealand. And I think it's still doable for Europe as well. So that's nice. Yeah, anyway, so that's a talk. And then the Saturday after that, not the Sunday, but the Saturday, Gary's going to be giving us starting classes, 6-week course, an introduction to esoteric astrology, or introduction to the Clairgate method, I think it's called. Would have helped had actually looked up the titles, but you can go and see them for yourself. If you're watching this, you probably already have. Yeah, and that's going to be a 6-week course, going also starting at 4 p.m. I think. Yes, I think it is 4 or 3. I have to check that. But anyway, looking forward to it. I'm not quite sure what else we need to say. Is there anything else we need to talk about? Oh, teaching. I want to ask you about teaching. Yeah, as we're going to meet you mainly as our teacher, this is a question I ask anybody who's teaching something on our site. What do you consider the 2 most important things about teaching?
If I were to give 2 words here, I would offer illumination and inspiration. If I could elucidate just slightly, am I allowed to? I hope so. I would say,
of course, I've just rambled on.
Clarity founded upon simplicity.
Okay.
And
so
inspiration, making the subject come alive for the students, so they're going to do something with the knowledge that they have been furnished with.
I really like
making it clear and empowering the person. I'm using a lot of words now rather than 2, but I'll stick with illumination and inspiration if I'm pushing.
I thought that was inspired, and I really liked it so much. I grabbed a pen and I'm writing it down. So I might actually put that up somewhere. Illumination and inspiration based on, did you say based on simplicity or founded?
Yeah, well, illumination, clarity based upon simplicity. Making
that's wonderful.
Clear. And inspiration, making the subject come alive for the student.
Yeah.
I do have Venus in Scorpio in the first house, conjunct my Sun in Jupiter. So hopefully that's relevant here.
I think that's a very good.
It is in my interpretation of esoteric astrology. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Jupiter, the teacher, such a strong love, wisdom ray, Sun in the first house. That's a good presentation to be able to be there for your students. But the Venus is that very spiritualizing. Well, if you're using Venus in that way, it's very spiritualizing, wanting to, that sense. That's how I understand it. That sense of thinking with the heart, not just thinking with the head. That's one of my things at the moment. I think it's really important that we all learn to think with the heart, which is very different to thinking with your emotions, which is what most people do. But with the greater spiritual desire to be of service to people. Yeah, no, it's wonderful. Okay, illumination and inspiration, clarity based upon simplicity, and bringing it alive for your students. That's really cool. I like that. Right, I think I've got one more question. Right.
Are we going to say a bit more about archetypes? I mean, you're the MC. You're the person conducting the interview.
Did we miss that? I thought we talked about it.
Very briefly, I'd have liked to have expanded
more about archetypes. Yes, please.
Possible. So I mentioned that Jung describes them as divine ideas, these reservoirs of psychic energy that permeate the human psyche and our experience on all levels of being.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of the wisdom teachings, the archetypes relate to the divine intent of the great solar being, the life which infuses our solar system, called the solar logos. And these divine ideas, elaborated by the solar being, are derived from the energies and interactions of the 7 rays, which are the ultimate archetypes. As Paley demonstrated, the zodiacal signs are comprised of combinations of ray energies, and each of the planets within our solar system is expressing the energies of one of these rays. So the archetypes then relate to the response of the solar logos to the ray energies impacting upon him. The outline is evolutionary intent. And we reside within the environment of what Jung described as the collective unconscious. The energy patterns found here are symbolized by the cyclic motion of the planets within our solar system against the backdrop of the zodiacal constellations. And these affect human consciousness and how we react to our surrounding environment. So we are continually nourished by, respond to, and donate to the archetypal patterns found within the collective unconscious as creation is ever evolving. And these archetypes surface in our consciousness in symbolic form through dreams, meditations, as I said, and by means of a concurrence between our inner subjective life and something happening in the outer world, which of course Jung famously described as synchronicity. The symbolic language allows the soul to offer us meaning and direction so we may implement its objectives. And this plays a very important part, symbolism, in giving birth to what Jung described as the transcendent function of the psyche. He called it the self. We say the higher self, and it uses symbolic language to advise us of its intent. Jung informs us that symbols are spontaneous, they are autonomous productions of the psyche, and that we don't create them, but rather we discover them from the higher planes of consciousness where the soul resides. And if we can understand the language of the unconscious, whose characters are the symbols which are communicated to us through dreams, meditations, then we can lead a spiritually effective life. And Dr. Baker devised his revolutionary technique of propositioning the unconscious, the Cleargate method, which is all about interpreting the symbols of dreams and meditations. As I say, in my opinion, it serves as an effective Rosetta Stone in terms of interpreting what we are receiving from the unconscious and from the higher self.
Now that is a lot to unpack there, Gary.
It is, and I'm very happy to take my time with students there, but again, getting back to clarity founded upon simplicity, the easiest way to look at this is to say the higher self communicates to us through symbolic language by relating symbols to the glyphs of astrology and therefore placements in the astrological chart. We are given a key towards interpreting these symbols. Everything we perceive out there, all the images, the experiences, these are stored within the psyche, and this is how the higher self communicates with us, because the higher self operates at a formless level of being, and it communicates to us through forms that we have experienced, our experiences in life, and these serve as symbols which point the way in terms of our evolution. Okay, so as I said, that is a lot to unpack, but to just try and understand a little bit of it, the symbols, the higher self, in a sense, we get to know ourselves, or we get to hear our higher selves through, first of all, we have to understand our personality self, which is which language, which symbols are we choosing to see, because of all the information that we get. You know, I mean, reality is an incredibly subjective thing. So cool. Understanding, firstly, to seeing where you're at can help you to understand what you're not seeing in a way, but then what do you need to see? And sorry, this is for babies like me, but yeah, what you need to, the soul, you need to learn how to hear
the soul in a sense, which is more the intuitive, that's how I understand, the intuitive mind, which will lead you to those particular symbols and a way of seeing them that is useful to the soul's purpose, or that's useful to extending the light. It's useful to knowing how to be of service to the world, how to be fully yourself and then of service, how to bring in light. Because symbols, to me, I mean, everything's symbols. It feels a little bit like the Matrix to me. You know, it's just a vast jumble of everything. Like, how do we actually put that into that form that is the I, that is the personality I, that is the soul I, that knows how to connect the two together so that you can become like a soul-infused personality, you know, so that the soul can be directing the personality. So understanding the symbols is kind of part of that bridge to understanding how to read symbols by, it's giving it a structure, would you say? Astrology is giving it a kind of a structure.
Esoteric astrology, it's obviously using techniques of traditional astrology. There's something we call the soul's purpose aspect. There's the standard forms of chart interpretation from the perspective of a soul using a personality. So regarding the course, that's what we'll be looking at, using the charts of participants, students. But regarding the symbolism, the wisdom teachings talk of a structure linking soul and personality called the Antakarana, or sometimes called the Rainbow Bridge. And we are effectively building this bridge or link to the soul by engaging in symbolism, interpreting the symbolism of dreams, symbolism of myth, etc. We are exercising abstract thought. That's the current frontier of human consciousness. We've developed the intellect to the nth degree. So we're seeking to go beyond that. And Baker's offering an astrological key towards doing this.
Right.
Relating everyday symbols to the astrological archetypes. Everything on the earth is a result of astrological archetypes.
Yeah.
You know,
well, it's the ray energy.
Yeah, the rays, different combinations, as I said, relate to the signs, and the rays govern the planets. And this, we have ceaselessly changing permutations as the planets orbit the sun against the zodiacal backdrop. And this is giving rise, well, over millennia since life on the planet began, this has created different forms and different psychological forms of expression on the earth, and these are all related to astrological archetypes. Everything. Baker has a technique called morphology, shape in relation to function. Clearly, it means, and we can relate everything in the world to astrological archetypes, either the single glyphs or combinations. For example, Libra rules bridges. It rules motor cars. If you look at the shape of the Libra glyph, if you turn it on its side, it's like a lock. It rules locks and keys, both literal and metaphorical. I mentioned the key earlier, key to the wisdom teachings. And this is providing a key for the higher self to communicate with us. We can take a placement in the chart and write it down in a spiritual diary and await subjective feedback by going over the symbolism of dreams we incubate through this process. We can meditate on it, see what precipitates into.
That's just what I was about to say. The other key, meditation, knowing how to empty the mind. So you understand the symbols and you meditate. 2 keys to developing the Antakarana, knowing how to travel it. There's something else I was going to say. Can't remember now, my mind's a blank. So
no, that's
anything
fine.
else you want to tell us about? Oh, synthesis, that's what it was. Everything you're saying, it sounds, it's about synthesis, yes? The Cleargate method, that's how
spiritual development is about, as you know, creating an integrated personality so that it is then able to withstand the fiery energies of spiritual initiation. Saturn, and Capricorn, it's an archetype, rule initiation, rule synthesis. And this is integral towards spiritual development. I mean, esoteric astrology is all about putting us together so we can function as a spiritual instrument where one becomes soul infused, initiation, synthesis. I actually possess a first ray mind. It's a first ray of will and power that governs synthesis. Anyone familiar with ray psychology will probably work that out, because I tend to communicate in quite a concise, no nonsense way. At least I try to.
Best way to communicate. Right, so I think that's it on my side. Is there anything else that you wanted to say, or do you feel like there's something that you wanted to talk about that you did get the opportunity?
I feel Baker's technique of assessing the soul's purpose will be of great value to all astrologers. Well, it is of great value to all astrologers. Yeah. As you're aware, as Bailey stated, the soul expresses its intent through the rising sign or ascendant. The sun sign represents a personality. And Baker's soul's purpose aspect, he calls it, takes a rising sign, the ruler, esoteric ruler of the rising sign by planet and house, and then the ruler of the sign on the cusp of that house where the rising sign ruler is located. I'll give you the example of my own chart. So I have Libra rising. The esoteric ruler Uranus is in the 10th house in Leo. Leo is on the cusp of that house. So we look for the sun, which is in the 1st house in Scorpio, squaring Uranus. And that is my soul's purpose aspect. That placement in particular offers insight into the purpose of the soul.
Well, that's going to be fascinating for anybody who does your course to have a look at that in their own charts.
There'll be a lot of concentration on that and what Baker gave out as the soul's purpose aspect. Regarding the Claregate method, it's more kind of preparing people for that. You're aware that Baker, his magnum opus is a 3-volume set of dictionaries. You'll see behind me, which volume 1 translates virtually every word in the English language into astrological correspondence, and volumes 2 and 3 look at all the possible astrological placements in the chart and give what is a symbolic interpretation of these. So it's really a key, that Claregate method is a key towards communicating with the soul, constructing the Antakarana through symbolism, and it's related to the astrological archetypes. So it builds upon Jung's fantastic pioneering work in terms of archetypes and symbols by providing an actual key or technique.
Good.
Baker
so 6-week beginner's course. People are going to look at the keywords and symbols for each sign, and right. Plus, they'll look at the esoteric rulerships of a sign. So,
of course, yeah.
Right. So, and the mundane rulerships. I don't know if anyone is going to turn up who knows no astrology as yet. If they did, would you be recommending that they learn do a little beginner's course first? Well, we've got one happening here, but it's starting in March. By the time anybody sees this for April, but yeah. So you need a rudimentary knowledge of astrology already to do your course.
Yeah, I would say absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, which is actually quite easy to find online, but I think I might put up a little beginner's page on our web anyway, so that people can read through it. And but you don't need to be you don't need to have a complex understanding of astrology already.
No, not at all. No, just to be aware of the fundamental components of the chart, planet signs and houses, how to pick them out.
Yeah,
perhaps
because you're going to build on it.
Geometrical aspects. I mean, whenever students have come to me for individual tuition, they have always possessed a sound knowledge of traditional astrology. When I use the word sound, I mean they're aware of all the basics. Perhaps they have a working knowledge of it. That might be a better description.
Yes, a working knowledge. You don't have to, you know, be a professional astrologer or someone who's been doing it for a long time. You just have to have a little understanding of what are planets, what are signs, the fact that signs have planetary rulers, and basic aspects. Okay, well, that sounds good. Now, I think we're done actually, because it's getting late. Unless you feel you've still got more you want to tell us, we're going to have it written up. It's written up, the basics of what we are learning in your course. And also, and anybody who has questions can write to me and I'll be happy to answer them or pass them on to Gary if you wish. Yeah. Okay, I think that's it.